Hi, everybody. I'm so glad everybody's with us. I'm Jill Patchen. I'm the corporate partner manager for AACT. Today, we have with us Patrick Hardy, who's the CEO of Disaster Hawk, the leading disaster management app in the US. He's a certified emergency manager, risk manager, and a FEMA Master of Exercise practitioner who has extensive experience working in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. He's worked in EMS first response, has been a longtime volunteer with the American Red Cross, and has a site director at the Louisiana State EOC. Patrick brings a lot of information to us today, and I'm looking forward to listening to this. I know we are all eager to learn and find out best practices for getting back in business when we are able to. So Patrick, I leave it to you.
Okay, Jill, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start the screen share here so everybody can see me. Let's see here. Oops, hold on. There we go. There we go. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. I'm going to do here is close this up so I can see everybody. Okay, great. So today, obviously, one of the biggest issues that's going on around the world, perhaps the biggest issue, is obviously dealing with the COVID pandemic. One of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today, I'm going to talk to you for about 25 minutes or so, is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to successfully prepare your theater for the COVID-19 response. And when I say preparing for it, that doesn't mean that COVID necessarily hasn't struck your community already. It doesn't mean that it hasn't had an effect already on your areas around you. But what I want to do is I want to sort of place your theater within sort of a narrower context of itself, isolated from the rest of the community, so that so we can kind of narrowly tailor your operations, your human resources, your financial responses from those from the community at large. So today, this is just sort of the basic roadmap here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about operations first. And the reason why I always go over that first is because I want to I want us to reframe in a mental sense of what COVID-19 is. And I want you to reframe it in a way that is helpful and useful to us when we look at it within the broader context of the emergency preparedness program for your theater, because that's going to be really important. The second thing is we're going to deal with your human resources, both your volunteers as well as your staff who are there both either seasonally or who are there year round. So that's going to become really important. I saw in the chat box a few of you work with the university system. Some of you have independent theaters. A couple of you emailed me just before this, just to give me an idea about where you were located throughout the U.S. So each individual type of theater and where you're located geographically is going to have a massive effect on the way in which you activate your disaster response. And then lastly is fundraising. So within fundraising, we're going to talk about a couple of different topics. One of which is going to donors, and which is a few questions we received directly on that. And then the other is obviously about the CARES Act and are you eligible for that? How much money can you get? What can the money be spent for? So we will talk about all those things. And then lastly, we'll do a Q&A. So as I said, I'll go for about 25 minutes or so. And then after that, I'll open it up to questions and answers. And I will answer first some of the questions that have been pre-posed to us, and then which I think actually will be answered. And I've done my best to have that answered within the presentation itself. But also I will create some direct answers for both the CARE Act as well as for the other broad areas of fundraising. But before we do any of that, before we talk about any of those details, before we discuss anything in regard to COVID, I want us to look at this. This is really important because, matter of fact, I was giving a webinar in front of some California hotels. I partner with one of the hotel associations in California, and I sat down with them and I said, you know what this is? What was going on here, what COVID is about, it's like an earthquake. And I was talking in Florida to another association, and I said, you know what I want you to pretend COVID is? I want you to pretend that COVID is a massive hurricane. If it helps you to think about it like that, think about it as Hurricane COVID. It's a disaster like any other. You need to approach it like any other disaster. Is it really large scale? Yes. Is there a lot of media hype? Yes. Is there a lot of preparations going on? Yes. Is there a massive international response? Yes, there is. In fact, I've been a disaster planner for 15 years. My father was a disaster planner for 35 years. And in our careers, and I was there during Hurricane Katrina. I was there during Hurricane Sandy. I've been through some of the largest disasters in the world. And this is without question as far as the tenor of the world is going, this is about as hyped up and as energized I think I've ever seen it. I've never seen anything quite like this. So, but what I want you to do is I want you to take that out of your mind entirely, and I want you to think about this as an individual response, or a response that is occurring to your property and to your facilities, to your theater, and nowhere else. I want you to think it within that narrow context. So let's kind of talk briefly. Do you have to have a plan in place? Yes, you do, and we're going to talk about that. In fact, today, I'm going to lay out for you what your pandemic plan needs to be like in your theater, because yes, fundraising is important. I know a couple of you are messaging me now saying, I know that fundraising is going to be the critical piece of what we're trying to do. That's absolutely correct. However, do you still have to have a context for reopening? Yeah. You still have operations. Yes. You have to put all these things back into play. So a plan is going to be really important, because I will just say this to you too. COVID is not the last pandemic we're going to have in our lifetimes, probably. So with the way the world is now globalized, as you can see, something that starts in Wuhan, China, and I actually lived in China, that's a very isolated area. To get from there to the U.S. to around the world as quickly as it has tells you how globalized and interconnected we are now. Training. Do you have to train people on your drill, on your plans? Yes. People have to be trained on your pandemic plan. They have to be trained on things like cleaning schedules and different things, and we'll talk about that. But you have to make sure you're incorporating training within it. Drills, what we call testing, is really about drills. Do we have to drill? Yes, you have to drill. Yes, you have to think about it. Do you have to do a drill on a pandemic? No. But like one of the things that we were going to do with AACT this year, as a matter of fact, was we were going to run a mass shooter drill up in Michigan. And that was going to be a real live drill. We were going to have actors, we're going to have people running around, and it was to be kind of to test and examine the way that a plan would actually activate. The actual disaster itself, which is really where we are now, that is a part of your cycle as well. It's a part of the process of responding. You're an organization like any other. Do you need to respond? Of course. And then lastly, we have to improve. And one of the things that I want you to do right now before you do anything else is I want you to, someplace in your office, and I know this sounds a little strange, but really do this. I've been telling this to organizations all over the U.S., is take a notepad that has nothing else on it, that you don't use for anything else. And I want you to lay it on your desk. I want you to put a pen on top of it, and that pen is used for nothing else but this. And I want you to write down everything you're doing right now in response to COVID-19. Every decision you make, everything you do, every action you take, you should be writing everything down. That is important for a number of reasons, but the primary one is lessons can be learned from this that will help you be more resilient down the road. And that becomes really important, because when you look within the scope of your operations, your human resources, your fundraising, things that you're doing now that you find work really well, you want to be able to apply those lessons down the road. And I find too often that organizations, and this isn't just held in the performing arts area, I mean, this is in every industry I work with, people go through massive disasters. They'll say, you know, Patrick, I did this, we did these things, it's amazing, and it worked. Then 2 years later, when that person retires or leaves, or the staff leaves or whatever, nobody remembers what any of those lessons were. So that's why it's important to have a plan in place. That's why it's important to have these improvements in place, because frankly, some of you folks live really on the edge of being able to remain viable in these kinds of incidences. And so that's why I want to make sure that you have the tools to be successful. And the way to do that is to write stuff down. So take a blank notepad, put a pen on it, and don't do anything else with that notepad except write down everything you do in regards to COVID. Every meeting you have, every phone call you make, just make simple notes, because you'll be amazed at what they will do, what that will do in the long run. And we'll talk about how to handle all that stuff. So, all right, so let's talk operationally. What do you have to have? You're going to have supplemental plans in regards to the COVID-19 response. The first is, and really this is the most important, which is why I've placed it on top, is crisis communication. You have to lay out exactly what your messages are going to be, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but your messages have to be really clear. How are you going to address the media? How are you going to address your employees? How are you going to address critical donors? How are you going to address interested parties? How are you going to address staff members and volunteers and docents and all those people? For those of you who are at the university, you have to have a crisis communication plan for dealing with and interacting with the university. My father was the head disaster planner for the University of Southern California. And one of the things that my dad was actually a drama kid, just like I was. And he used to go to the theater, which was actually an independent theater. I don't know if it still is anymore, but it was an independent theater. And he used to turn to them and say, look, you have to have a communication methodology because the university has a message that is separate from yours. So make sure that you are laying out so we can coordinate, and we better do this now, because when an earthquake strikes, because that was our main threat at the time that everybody was worried about. And he was saying, if you can create and codify these messages now, that will make us successful down the road. And you have to have these messages in place. I talk to theater people all the time, and they tell me stuff like this. They say, Patrick, I've been in this world for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. I know how to handle it. And I'm just going to be honest with you. You don't. You do not know how to deal with this. This is something that none of us have dealt with before outside of government. In fact, when I worked with the Louisiana government, and we were initially creating pandemic plans, this was back when I was just out of college, and we were worried about anthrax, we had to have a crisis communication plan. One of the things in regards to COVID that needs to be very specific is, and I know this is going to sound strange, but this is the assumption I want you to go with, no matter what. I want you to assume that COVID has already struck your theater. That's what I want you to assume. And it doesn't mean the theater itself. It doesn't mean that, this property has COVID on it. I just mean I want you to assume right now that an employee is COVID positive. I want you to assume that. Why would I want you to do that? Well, there's two reasons. One is that you're never caught flat-footed, because eventually that is very likely to happen, first of all. Second of all, if you have the messages in place, it means that you can keep ahead of it. So that, because if you or someone in the theater ends up being COVID positive, that is going to get into the media. There is no question about that. They will ask you later if there's an infection, if a number of people in your staff become ill, that's going to become something that's going to become a question. If your donors and people you are asking to provide money to you see that you are not prepared, you are not making sure that your theater is in a position to be proactive, they're going to think you're disorganized. And you really need to be in a position of communicating effectively. We live in a world now where if you are being reactive, then you really lost the game. You've really already lost the game. So you have to be really proactive. You have to be in a position where it's your message or it's theirs. That's your choice. Dealing with, and I put the word events, and I sort of use this term very broadly. You have to have a plan for when you reopen in dealing with events on the property. So when you actually start resuming rehearsals, when performers begin to come back, when your season starts, you need to prepare for what you're going to be doing in the fall and the winter time. Because no matter what you're hearing about in the news, it is very likely that this will go in waves, and eventually what happened in China recently, I don't know how many of you saw the news, but what happened in China was they got down to basically 1 case a day. And that's pretty good when they were having hundreds of cases a day, and that's the way these things naturally progress. There's always a kind of a climax portion, and where there's a big, where there's a big boost, and then it begins to tailor off a little bit. So we'll really see how it goes, but you do need to prepare for your seasons ahead of time. So your plans do need to address that stuff. So right now, if you're saying, well, I don't know what's going to happen in my fall season, I don't know what's going to go on with the winter season, I don't know how we're going to do this and that, well, you need to start planning for that now, because if you don't plan for success, then you're always going to be planning for failure. So, okay, so do you need to think about supplies and equipment? Yes. One of the things that I'm now telling people in the performing arts is that when this actually becomes, when the COVID wave begins to really decline and steep down, there are going to be changes in social distancing rules. There are going to be questions held about large groups of people being in one area. That means that you're going to have disinfecting supplies with you at all times. I had a couple of theaters who said, I don't know if I can do that logistically. I don't have the room for it. I don't know where I would put it. You're going to have to find a place. There just is no question about this. And in some states, and in fact, in healthcare, I was actually telling a lot of my healthcare clients, so I work with a lot of skilled nursing clients and nursing homes and things, and I told them, I said, this is the reality, that what's going to happen with the pandemic is going to become permanent. You will have to have some kind of schedule in place for environmental cleaning. And I don't mean it has to be industrial cleaning, but it does mean that performing arts theaters at night, you're going to have to perform deep cleaning of the surfaces, of the seats, of all the surfaces, the props even. I know it sounds weird, but even performers who are touching things are going to have to be told. When you have manipulated an object with your hand, well, whether it's within the context of a performance or if someone backstage has touched it, then you're going to have a regime in place for how to deal with cleaning all those things. That becomes really important. Then you really need to think about how you're going to recover on a physical level. So in other words, if you have a large theater, you're going to have to really think about, what am I going to have to disinfect? What are we going to have to do in regards to landlords? How are we going to deal with the long-term recovery of making sure that people and staff feel safe coming here? Because I can guarantee you, as the day is long, when performers return in the fall, they're going to ask you questions. What are you doing to keep us safe? And if you have no answer, or if you simply say, well, you know what, we put in a regime, we have the wipes out, and we ask you to wash your hands, follow the CDC guidance, that is insufficient. You really have to be proactive and say, at night, right after the performances, we're doing this, we're washing these, we're wiping these down, and you're part of that. And what we would like you to do is X, Y, and Z. And for those of you who have information technology, you do have to have a plan in place for this as well. For those of you who don't know, there has been an increase in cyber attacks because of the number of people who are working online. So make sure that you are thinking about that all the way through. So, okay, so let's talk about human resources planning. First of all, on a management level, you do have to have some kind of planning in place. So you need to assign people who are clearly in charge whenever there's a performance, whenever anything is going on. It isn't just simply saying, well, the stage manager is in charge or the director's in charge or whatever, during rehearsals, whatever. You have to have somebody in management who is managing and manipulating not only the messages, but what's actually going on. If we are still in the middle of a small peak, let's say it's in the fall, let's say it's months from now, the lockdowns have been lifted, you're still going to have clear responsibility of who's going to be doing what and what people are going to be expected to do. Staff and volunteers, you're going to have to discuss a few things. And obviously not all of this applies to everybody. I totally understand. But because we have a lot of different people for running different kinds of theaters and things, I'm going to take as broad a brush as I can and cover as much as I can. Your disaster plan, and I really mean this, I really say that as in you need to have a plan in place. Your plan needs to address the following. You need to address what happens if a staff member becomes ill with COVID-19. And not only today, not tomorrow, but what happens if they get sick 4 months from now, 5 months from now? What happens if there is an outbreak at the theater? Do you need to deal with that? Yes. Do you have to have a plan for that? Yes. Do you have to have a deal for how you're going to handle all those things? Absolutely, 100%. The psychological, also, you also have to have provisions in place for how you're going to handle it if a staff member's family member becomes ill or whatever, because those things are going to be important also. In fact, in hospitality, particularly ones that have been considered quote unquote essential businesses, they have to remain open. I've told them you have to have a provision in place for what happens if a family member of theirs becomes COVID positive. What do you do then? You have to plan also for the psychological elements of everything, because you're going to have a lot of people who are hyped up because of the news, because of what's going on, because of famous people who are becoming ill, such as Tom Hanks and his wife. I mean, there's a lot of people now who are very visible, who are now ill. That is a first. We've never quite seen that before, and that's going to have a psychological toll because everybody is beginning to think that, well, everyone is sick. So you're going to have to talk to them about that as well. Just a suggestion I have for you, and I've been telling this to the hospitality industry all the time, which is even though you may not be open, even though people may not be there, you may have furloughed them, still email them, still call them, still ask them how they're doing, because it's important for them to see you as their employer, as somebody who cares. For those people who work there full time, do you need to address benefits? Yes. You need to talk about sick days? Yes. In fact, one of the things I've now told almost every business I'm working with is you need to now consult with attorneys to make sure that you are understanding the changes in the laws. In California and New York, the laws have now changed in regards to COVID-19 and sick days. So I'm not an attorney myself, so I'm not really going to get into it, but you do need to review what the state laws are in regards to sick days. So if you have people who are there full time, if you furloughed everybody, that's fine. But for those who are still working, you have to put provisions in place for if someone becomes COVID positive and then has to take sick days. There are additional days you may have to provide. Payroll is obviously important. And so talking to people when they're going to get paid, all that stuff. One thing that I will just kind of tell you, and we'll talk about this in just a minute in regards to messaging, is don't be doom and gloom. Really try not to be doom and gloom about all this stuff, because I get it. There's a lot of things in the news that seem very negative, but you know, try to be as positive as you can. The last thing is sending people home. You do need to have a policy in place for the fall and whenever you reopen about sending people home. That is going to be permanent, probably in some states. That's my guess right now, just based on the political zeitgeist. I'm seeing a lot of changes in how the medical surveillance is handled at the employment level, and I can almost tell you for sure that the laws are going to change because some states do not allow you to ask any questions of people who may be ill. That, I guarantee you, is going to change. You do have to have a policy in place for when you would send people home, under what conditions, not just saying things like, well, you know, if they're coughing and sneezing, I'm going to send them home. No, that's arbitrary. You have to lay it out specifically. If they have this temperature and they are at this level and they're at all these things, then I send people home. For those of you who are interested, I actually have exact language that we're using with companies throughout the U.S., and I'm happy to provide that to you afterwards. It's also on our mobile app too, so for those who may be interested in that. Okay, last thing, and then we're going to move into fundraising, which is one of the things I want to talk to you about for sure is making sure that you are training people on every element of this plan when you return. Absolutely. You need to make sure that people, every single person, every volunteer, every docent, every prop person, every performer, I don't care if they're the lead, it does not matter. Everyone must be trained and must understand what your policies are. One of the things that can get you into a lot of trouble is if you are not laying out black and white policies, if you are being really arbitrary, if you are, to some volunteers, you're applying certain policies, but other volunteers you're not, or docents or whatever, whoever it is. You have to lay out the policy and be very clear. If you're going to have policies that are different from with employees who are full-time versus people who are just volunteering, that's fine. But you have to make that clear to everybody. You know, you have to actually look everyone in the eyeballs and say, this is the way we're going to do things. If you're a volunteer, these policies apply. If you're full-time, these are going to apply. Make sure everybody hears it. The other thing is too, is when you return, when general managers and things, I know sometimes people may not actually physically be on site. Sometimes people are gone. You have to make sure that they are actually, you actually can create a conference call, put them on speaker, and lay the phone physically in front of you so that everybody knows that all of management is there. Everybody. No one may skip. You have to make these meetings mandatory. That's really important. So, okay. So now let's talk a little bit about fundraising. And before I get too much into this, I want to mention one other thing, and that's one of the reasons why the arrow is pointing to the recovery plan, because one of the things that your plan has to cover are things like, when do we open? When do we reopen? What conditions do we decide to close again? How do we decide? So these are all things that have to merge. That just because you're a performing arts theater, just because you're a nonprofit, just because you're a X, Y, and Z fill in the blank, doesn't mean you're not an organization. I treat you the same way that I would treat any business doing anything. I work with hundreds of restaurants, I work with hundreds of hotels, I work with hundreds of bars, everything else. And every business, I tell them the exact same thing. You've got to have written disaster plans that make it clear. So let's talk a little bit about fundraising. We got a lot of questions about this. So now at this part, I'm going to talk to you about dealing with donors and then also dealing with the CARES Act as well. Starting first, you need to develop a recovery plan, which lays out how you're going to get money and from where. And what does your plan have to cover? Well, we'll talk about that. The second thing you need to make sure you're doing, and again, I'll get into these into more detail, so don't worry, I'm not skipping over stuff. I'm just kind of overviewing it for us. The second thing you have to do is communicate with donors. You have to communicate with donors early and often, and I will tell you in just a minute what you should be saying to each of them all the time. The third thing is you need to execute the strategy that you have put in place. So whatever strategy that is in regards to fundraising, whether it is you're going to try to get an SBA loan, or if you're going to try to, if you're going to execute a particular, donor strategy, whatever. And then the last thing is you have to communicate with donors. So I've put that twice, not because I'm lazy. I do that because you need to be constantly communicating with them. Even if you are closed, do you need to communicate with your donors? Yes, you do, all the time. You have to do that. So let's talk about how and what we need to do. All right, so fundraising. First, you need to define what is going to be your long-term and your short-term plan. So what are your goals in the immediate term? So what are your immediate needs? So for example, if it's paying the bills, if you have something specific, if you have an exact number in place, that is great because that helps you to at least define what the goal has to be. You also need to define what the long-term recovery is going to look like because there may be shortfalls. There may be things where you decide, you know what, I still would need to do my normal fundraising that I would have to do year-round, not only for the losses I suffered with COVID-19, but just fundraising in general, because I have this going on, or I have this program I want to put on, or I have this youth program, whatever. All those things have to be considered in your plan. Does this need to be written? Yes. Do you need to put COVID-19 specifically in your fundraising plan? Yes, you do, and put it under its own header of recovery. That becomes really, really important. Communications. Let's talk first, when you're dealing with donors, there's a few things, a few of you asked on the weekend and emailed us and said, well, what should I be saying to these people? I know they're going to get bombarded by lots of theaters asking for money, a lot of performing arts folks who are going to be asking for things. How do I handle that? Here's the best way of doing it. Don't ask for anything. Your first communications with them, don't ask for anything. Simply brief them. In fact, that's the recommendation that I have given now with the museum industry, which I do a lot of work in as well, which is I told them, I said, when you're reaching out to donors, they're going to get donation requests from lots of other interests and foundations and things. The first thing you should do is incorporate them in what you're doing. Let them know what you are doing right now. Let them know what your plans are right now. Don't ask them for anything, simply give them information. We're closed right now, we're doing this, we're being really proactive. And by the way, really, if you write a pandemic plan, you know what's going to be really awesome is if you turn to your donors and say, hey, we actually spent the time and created a pandemic plan. And our plan is in place, we are activating it, and we are doing this, 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 and this. We are anticipating a great fall season. We're expecting a great winter season. However long this lasts, we're going to be there and we're going to make this happen and that happen. But you be really positive. Don't be negative in these first emails. Be really positive. Say, listen, we recognize something's going on. There's clearly a change in the national paradigm. We understand that. But in that moderate term, we're going to be proactive. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, and we're committed to our mission statement. Go back to the mission statement of your theater. Go back to the mission statement of your performing groups, the ones that operate in your theater, so many groups that are, and make sure that the message is consistent throughout. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you're not proactive in communications, people will make stuff up. and rumors will begin to form and lots of things will begin to happen. The last thing is whatever motivated those donors to donate to you in the first place, appeal to those, because that is a wonderful chance for people to be motivated in exactly why they should continue to give you money and why they should, continue to support you. Those become really, really important. And last thing is strategy execution. So now there are two strategies, and we're going to talk about in the next slide, but one is the online strategy, which means not everything has to be done in person. I know we have a physical facility, we have a physical theater, all those things, that's great. But you can do things online. There are things that you can do, and we'll talk about that, as well as you also need to maintain your in-person strategy. If you have an annual fundraising event that goes on in November, goes on around Christmas time, whatever, don't cancel those. Don't cancel them. Don't throw them online. Keep them going. That lets people know that you know what you're doing and that you have everything in hand. If they think that you are disorganized, I can guarantee you they will not donate anything at all. I can guarantee it, because they're going to see it going into a hole. They want to see theaters that are active and positive. I tell it to other nonprofits too. I told a few of them just last week. I was in a webinar just like this one, and I was telling them, look, if they think that you're behind the ball, if they think that you aren't doing anything, or that they think that you have no idea what's going on, then nothing is ever going to change, and that's not going to be helpful to you. So, okay, so next let's talk about the CARES Act. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of things. Actually, this isn't the CARES Act. I apologize, I had the wrong slide there, but the CARES Act is next, I promise you. Obviously, this is still some fundraising ideas for you. Obviously, ticketing. A couple of you asked me about refunding. You need to have a clear policy regarding refunding season tickets. My suggestion to you, again, this is not, you have to look at the terms and conditions of your theater and the ticket itself. You need to think about all this stuff, which is, do you give refunds if you have a hurricane? Do you give refunds if there's a tornado and something's damaged, if the community's damaged? Whatever those are, be really consistent about whether or not you're going to refund or not. A suggestion I have is also maybe say, you know what, we're not going to refund you, but we're going to either put on additional performances later in the year, or we'll refund so it goes to next year. But then again, if you do that, now you're shifting the money over. Now you have to keep that long-term plan in place for what you're going to do if that money isn't there. So in other words, if you have displaced the money you would use this year to next year, now you're going to have a shortfall next year. So you have to have a broader plan in place. Some fundraising ideas for you for things that I have seen, and last weekend I contacted a number of my partners in the performing arts, particularly with comedy shows and things. There are lots of different things that you can try and do. The first is virtual events. You actually can do virtual events online. You can put on a webinar like this where you're actually having performers do things. Obviously, you can do things like YouTube videos, especially if you use if there's a lot of like millennial shows that are more geared towards millennials or Gen Z folks. The physical events, like I was talking about, if you're still planning on having a physical event in the fall, don't cancel it yet. There's no point to doing that now. In fact, I was slated to speak at about 17 different places earlier this year. I have to tell you, I doubt I'm going to be even home for Thanksgiving, because in the fall, in November and December, I'm going to be gone almost that entire time speaking at various events, because they committed to that and said, listen, just because we didn't have the event earlier doesn't mean we're not going to have it later on, because we don't know what's going to happen. You can also do things like shareable content for shows you've already done. If you have recorded them before, maybe you've sold them before, put them online and charge something for it, or don't at all, and just say, hey, listen, this is something we're providing to you as part of our commitment to the community, because we know you guys are at home and everyone's sick of each other and they want something else to do. I know that everyone has binge watched every episode, of The Crown and this and that. So here's something brand new that maybe you haven't seen before. So it kind of gives you a sense of that. The other thing I saw, which I really like this, the flash fundraisers are fantastic. If properly organized, they can get you to the promised land very quickly. You can do things like just saying, hey, listen, we're going to open up a GoFundMe page, and we're only going to do this for 2 hours or 3 hours or 24 hours, and really gear people up. and just say, we're just going to push everything into that period of time. We're going to try to reach our goal. People instinctively think that's really cool because that's a specific goal. This isn't going to go on for months and months, and this is something I've committed to for this year. I've committed to this theater. I've committed to this, community group, and I want to support them as best I can. And so then those tend to work really, really well. The last, obviously, is online sales. Online sales are really important because you can still sell tickets ahead of time. I actually know a theater in the Washington, Seattle area that is actually selling tickets a year and a half in advance. Now, do people know that it's possible that they may not attend those events? Sure. But you know what? They do it because they can, because they care about them, because they want them to stay afloat. They don't want them to go under, and they want to create something very unique. So whatever is unique to your theater, try it. For those of you who may be at the universities, there are a lot of university students who are obviously home now, so it's kind of a chance for you to kind of think outside the box. Millennials and things and others like different kinds of engagement. Okay, so now that we've moved away from fundraising and we've talked about planning, I'm going to go through this last part. It's called the CARES Act, for those of you who know about it. It was the act that was passed through Congress that was meant to provide support to small businesses. And I use that term broadly, okay? So meaning for those that are for-profit as well as nonprofit. So they really go into a couple of different categories. One is the economic injury disaster loan, and the other is the paycheck protection loans. These loans are essentially meant to keep people off of unemployment. It's meant to prevent people from having to default against bills and against rent that they have to pay and everything else. So those are things that they're trying to do. So let me kind of give you a few of the details. And let me just preface by saying this before I conclude here, with these details. I don't know every detail about it. If there are things that I do not know, though, I will find out. So if you have a question and you don't know, and I don't know the answer to it, I will find out, and I will be sure to get back to you so that you are clear, because I want to make sure you guys have everything you possibly need. So even if I don't have time to answer it this afternoon, I'm happy to answer it later on. Because I want to support you, and I'm sure that ACT perhaps will put it on their website, a little bit of the Q&A. So, because I work very closely with the SBA, I have 2 businesses myself, so I'm fairly knowledgeable about everything in regards to these loans, but not everything, of course. First of all, just a few basic broad line details. 501c3s are eligible for these loans. That's the first thing. Other eligibility requirements that are there are things like you don't have to worry about collateral. You don't have to worry about personally having to guarantee the loan, which is cool. Many of these loans, again, not officially, but many of these loans are probably going to be forgiven. And my guess is that almost all of them will be, but that will depend on a number of factors. But pretty much the SBA, as well as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I was just reading their white paper on this, that pretty much most if not all of the loans are going to be forgiven. That's the reason why the government's doing it in the first place. They can give up to $10 million for small businesses. Eligibility requirements, the other thing I forgot also is that in regards to these 2 loans, is that you can apply for both, but you can't accept money for both. You can only accept money from one or the other one. They will ask you for a series of things. They will ask you for the payroll needs over a certain period of time. I think it's February 2019 to May of 2019. I'm almost certain, but I'll have to check on that. But you need to identify the immediate needs that you're going to have, because what they're going to do is that they will look at the eligibility of that and they will provide you whatever you need. And that's the reason why the loans are there in the first place. A couple of you asked me, is this a paper application? The SBA has farmed this out to their lenders. So what does that mean for you? It means that you could do it online. You do not have to go in person into a bank. You do not have to physically walk up to a lender. In fact, the loan, actually, as a matter of fact, at the end of this, I will stop the sharing for a minute, and then I will actually show you part of the online application that you can fill out. So there are different places where you can do it. You can also hire a company who will help you through the application process. There are a lot of various ways that they can support you. The money, what can the money be used for? The money can be used for a variety of things. Obviously, payroll is one. There are things like rent on the buildings as well as ensuring that there's a certain amount of interest that can be paid on certain kinds of loans and things. So it's a rather complex kind of loan, but they are available for you. One of the things that I will emphasize is that every single person who is hearing me right now should apply for it, because and I was talking to an expert in these loans yesterday, and we could do an entire webinar on the CARES Act alone, is that because the money is going to be forgiven, a lot of it's an opportunity for you to maybe make the ends meet that you might not have thought would have made ends meet otherwise. For a lot of things that maybe you feel like, there's a gap in what you might be able to do and not be able to do. So that's an overview of what the CARES Act is. Apply for both loans. Do you have to apply for them separately? Yes, you do. You have to apply for each one differently. As I said, I run two companies. I'm CEO of two different businesses. And in both of those, I instructed my financial people, we have to apply for them separately. That's what they're meant to do. They're meant for small businesses. It's meant to provide you guys with what you need, and it's meant to support the arts in its own way, because they understand that a lot of nonprofits are art-based. There's a couple of limitations which probably don't apply to a lot of folks here, and so I think that it's just a matter of applying, finding out whatever they need. They'll ask you for some documentation, and then you'll be in a position to be able to get the money, perhaps. So, as I said, if you have specific questions about this, I'm happy to provide that to you. Couple of things, and then I'm gonna kind of answer some questions. I see a bunch of sort of popped up in the messaging here. The thing that I want you guys to think about now, before I get into the, because I'm sure a lot of the questions, matter of fact, I'm seeing a lot of questions about the CARES Act. I'm happy to answer as many of them as I can. Is I want you guys to now step away from the immediate fundraising needs, and I want you to think more broadly again. There's a couple things I really want to tell you. First of all, we do not know if COVID-19 is going to be seasonal or not. I don't care what's said in the news. I don't care what you heard on CNN. I don't care where you heard anywhere. The CDC has said we do not know if this is going to be something that is going to be permanent, if it's something we can eradicate, if it is something that is going to be seasonal like the flu. So as a result, you need to think broad-based long-term, because if COVID-19 strikes during your season and all of a sudden lots of people are not going to be coming to your theater, you have to be prepared for that. You have to have plans in place. If it becomes a heightened awareness issue, you have to immediately begin to ramp up. Yep, we have supplies. Yes, we have this. Yes, we have that. Because the loans that we were talking about here, that's not going to last forever. That's not forever. Eventually, it's going to be a place where you are going to be expected to operate on your own, and you can't simply do that just by saying, well, I'm just going to hope that President Trump and the Congress are able to put something together. That's not always going to be the case. So if this is long term, you need to think long term. The reason why I have 12 to 18 months in red is because your plans really need to cover that, because in between 12 and 18 months, that's when we will know. That's when we will know for sure if there is a vaccine. That's when we will know for sure what the treatment is going to be. That's when we will know for sure if this is going to be permanent or not. So one of the things that I tell every single theater, and I want you to make sure you are doing this every day, please, go to the CDC's website. There is an updated page if you want me to. For those of you who are interested, I will send you the URL link. Every day you go into the office, because you're clearly at home, the first thing you should do is check the CDC's website, because don't perpetuate rumors. Your staff may be emailing you saying, I heard this on here, I heard this person say this. No. Follow what the CDC's guidance is and make sure that your employees and everyone else is following that, because this is not going to end anytime soon. So making sure that you're taking control and you are controlling the narrative, that will help you in the longer run. So that's pretty much it. So it ran a little bit longer than I had expected, but I want to make sure I covered everything as much as I could. What's really important is that to make sure that you guys are in a position to be successful and that you guys are able to respond to this pandemic as well as to other ones in the future as well. There's just a free resource that I'm going to tell you about. I have a free COVID-19 pandemic plan for you. I have a mobile app called Disaster Hawk. I will make it available on April 2nd, 2020. The app is live now, but the community theater plan for COVID-19 is being developed as we speak, and it will be live on April 2nd. That has all the things we were talking about, sick leave and pay and the CARE Act and this and that. All of that will be in there. You can customize it specific for your theaters. This is normally something we charge for, but because of our partnership with AACT, we are not going to charge you anything at all. There will be individual plans for sanitation and dealing with staff and dealing with crisis communications and dealing with the media and dealing with sending people home and dealing with fundraising issues and donors and all that stuff. I will make that entirely available to you. And the most important thing is that if there are things that you learn over time, tell us about it and we will fix it and improve the mobile app. That's one of the reasons why we have it. Those plans can be available. You can show that to your staff members. You can show it to your donors. You can show it to people who are coming to the theater. So it has lots of different plans on there for you. I want to, because it's our commitment and it's my commitment as a kid that used to be in the theater. I recall when I was a high school senior, I was in West Side Story. It was one of the best opportunities I ever had. So for me, I'm happy to support you guys in any way I can. So now I'm going to surrender it back to Winston or to Jill, and they will kind of take me from here. And I'm happy to answer any questions that may have come up.
All right, so two things here. For all of my attendees, if you could please go back to your Q&A section of the meeting there. And I'm going to leave the next 5 minutes while I get Patrick set up with his side of the Q&A stuff. But if you guys could go through those questions to give a thumbs up to or upvote so that we can make sure that those questions are answered. I'm going to leave room here for about 3 to 5 questions. Patrick, are you good with that?
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
Perfect. Perfect. That way we can make sure to get your questions answered, you all. If you do have any other questions, please make sure to go through those and upvote them for us so that we can get to them quicker. Now, Patrick, if you would well, actually, let's go ahead and see if we can get to the Q&A section here for you while you share your screen, while all of this information is here for us too as well. Whenever you move your cursor around, are you able to see the Q&A bar or the bar? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you'll click that for me, there will be a pop-up that'll happen for you. And the first thing that you should see is the open. And there should be a 48 next to that.
I'm gonna hold on. I have to pause my share because it doesn't let me do that at the same time. So hold on a second. Okay, there we go. Okay.
Perfect. And honestly, if you go through each of these, the ones that these guys need to be answered more are at the top, and everything underneath is something that we can address in a future meeting as well.
Sounds good. Go ahead and do this. Hold on just a minute, everyone. Give me just a moment, please. Okay, I had to stop the PowerPoint there because otherwise it was giving an error message there. Okay, so let me go ahead and some of these I can answer much faster than others. So let me go ahead and try and answer as many as I can. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, do you think it's realistic we might not be able to have performances this summer? The answer is we do not know. However, because President Trump has extended the national lockdown for another month. One of the things that we need that I'm telling people is best rule of thumb is this: for every month that they extend the lockdown, you need to prepare to delay another 2 months. That's what we say. And the reason is simply because that is sort of a basic sort of standard deviation of the amount of time that these pandemics tend to last. And it tends to be an issue where we want to try to get you guys open as fast as possible. I will, of course, keep everyone updated, and you guys can see it in the news also. But one thing I will tell you is this. A couple of people asked me this over the weekend, which is one of the things to look at is when they begin to reopen restaurants and they begin to reopen bars and things like that, when those start to reopen, you can start to think that they're going to begin opening larger spaces. But until that time, for right now, just kind of plan for when President Trump ends the national lockdown, tack on 2 additional months. So if this goes for another month, it's going to be 4 months. So if he says, if on May 1st, he says, we got to extend it another month, tack on, so it's going to be about 4 months away. So can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Yes, I will provide that to you as a PDF. Absolutely. And my contact details are in there. That's my cell phone number and my email address. Feel free to contact me. I'm happy to help you folks in any way I possibly can. And I have staff who work specifically with theaters and performing arts. You're interested in the language for sending folks home, I will provide that to you, absolutely. So if I will make sure to write that down, so I'll give you the language. And for those of you who use the app, that will be in the app as well. It will literally be there word for word, but I will also provide it to you guys in case you guys decide to create a written plan too. How does the CARES Act deal with independent contractors as opposed to paid staff? It doesn't. From what I know is that 1099s are also included. So you can, but again, there is a bandwidth of time to think through there's a bandwidth of time that they are looking for. So if you guys are seasonal, they have extended that only 1 month. So in other words, a regular small business like mine that operates year round, they have asked for our payroll from February 15th to May 15th of 2019. So if you're not open at that time, the SBA has given an additional month. So it's from March 2019 to June 2019. So they give you that additional time period. So, and I have a lot of 1099 employees, so we have included them as well, because remember, the purpose of this is to make sure that people are not going on unemployment insurance. I've noticed several shows are requesting or offering option tickets already paid for shows might be considered a donation rather than asking for a refund. Would this be a good idea? I think the better idea is, first of all, I think that that's perfectly fine. And I would really say that one of the things is that you should really know your donor pool, is kind of get an idea of what you think they're prepared to offer. So if they think that that's going to be a donation, you think that's going to work, that's fine. But here's the thing. If you want to do that, this is what I would strongly suggest is offer it to them. And don't just offer it to them in one mass email. Don't just send it one mass email. If you have the contact details for these folks, contact them, call them, and ask them. Have your staff call. Have people ask, because if you have a voice on the phone and you're explaining why you're actually doing that, that is something that I have found is really successful. Even with some of the larger nonprofits I work with that are nationally based, I turn to them and say, listen, make phone calls if you can, because that would really help. So that they know that you're being communicative and that you're treating them as a real person. They're not just a number in a big line of people. So that's what I have found has tended to work well. Somebody keeps, well, yes, I do keep saying that that's possible that we are returning in the fall. I'm not confident. I don't know if we're going to be doing June or July shows. I don't know. It's really up to President Trump, to be honest with you, because as I said, if the lockdowns continue, if we get a large wave of fatalities, then I can guarantee you the government is going to extend it. I am virtually certain of that fact. So I would say you need to do your own planning either way. So this is the reason why you shouldn't just do this just off the top of your head. Like, write it out, saying, okay, if we're able to open June and July, this is what we're going to do: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If we can't open, we're going to push it to this. Do we have to change the messaging? Yes. Are we going to have to change the way we operationally work? Yes. Do we have to talk to the groups that we're working with? Yes. Our donors? Yes. The messaging has to be there. I can't emphasize this enough. You've got to communicate with everybody, and don't just do it in a mass email. Call, interact with people, explain what's going on, and I find that people do much, much better. Do you want me to keep going, Winston, or you want me to hold off?
I think that we have time for another 2 or so. So I'm going to go ahead, and Dennis, I do believe that your question was answered just now. So if you'll jump to Kathy Davis.
Some casting directors should consider double casting in case of COVID-19. However, it feels overwhelming if staff or cast is diagnosed. They may have exposed different people. First of all, Kathy, I agree with that entirely. In fact, when you write your COVID positive plan, we didn't have time to talk about it today, but when you're dealing with people who are COVID positive, you do need to make sure you do have strong understudies, because even if someone isn't COVID positive themselves, anyone they may have touched or interacted with could become infected as well. One of the things that one of the bigger theaters is doing is that they actually are having casts that are interacting singularly in these sort of smaller side stages, so that they aren't interacting with lots of staff until it becomes something that they absolutely have to do. So they're doing whatever they can to isolate themselves. The number of props are being decreased. I'm seeing people are talking about decreasing the number of sets and things, and I understand that. In fact, the other thing you guys have to think about too, I totally forgot, I got this, I can't believe I forgot, is costumes. Is when you have costumes, you have to disinfect them. You have to make sure that those are hard to do because some of these things are obviously, they can be very delicate or they're esoteric, so you can't wash them in a normal way. They have to be dry cleaned or whatever. So you have to think about that as well, because we know that the virus can be transmitted on clothing. To what extent, I don't know. I don't think that they know, but that's one of the things that they have said to people. And one of the things we do talk about is making sure that you are having a program in place, so it isn't just dealing with the surfaces that people are on or the armrests of the chairs. It's a lot of different parts of it. Where can we find out about how to apply for the CARES Act loans? I will provide a link to Winston and to everyone else that you can go on there, and that will have the application there for you. So I'll provide you, and if some of you need additional information on some state-specific things, I can provide that also. Let's see. Be sure the licensing verbiage for MTI live streaming is intense. Be sure to read and understand all of it. There's a lot of restrictions about how you can stream it. You're absolutely right. Licensing is a huge deal. So make sure that anything you are live streaming, you're getting the necessary requests beforehand, you're paying the necessary royalties. Again, this is a planning process. So it's one of those things you can't just do off the top of your head. It requires some thought. So it is something you have to consider down the road. Just one more question, and then I'll move forward. As we understand it, repayment of loans will begin in 6 months, but loan forgiveness will not start. So that's 3 or 4 months of loan payments that we would have to pay. That I do not know the answer to. I do not know the answer to that, but I will find out. I will ask I have a vice president who actually handles our loans, and I will ask her and find out what that answer to that question is. So I've made a note of that, and that's that's pretty much it. Unless you want me to keep going, Winston, I think that's pretty much it.
We are at time, so I'll just note that this meeting was recorded for you all. We will make sure to post it on our website. We thank you, Patrick, for all of your information that you have provided us and answering our questions and what have you. Just note that we do have a Facebook page that is titled the COVID-19 Community Theater Resource Group. Please make sure to check that out as we are continuing to update that, as well as our resource page online. There will be a post webinar survey that will be going out to you at the end of this meeting here. If you have any questions that you would like for me to pass on to Patrick or to my executive director, Quiana Clark-Rowland, please feel free to shoot that over to me at Winston, that's WINSTON, at AACT.org. Note that we will try to get another webinar up and running. I do believe that's something that is still in discussion, correct, Patrick?
Yes, it is. And in fact, what we'll try and do is that for that one, we will do an update. And what we'll do is I will answer more questions at that time. So I'll block out a lot more time for people to have their questions answered as well. Perfect.
Kelly, to answer that question, the name of the Facebook page is COVID-19 Community Theater Resource Group. And I can definitely add a link to that page as well in the email that will be going out. I hope that you guys have gotten the questions answered in a way that is helpful for you all, but note that we are here for you to continue with your theater and make sure that you guys are moving on in a positive way. I hope that you all have a safe and healthy week, and we shall see you all soon.